I want to talk first of all about an article that came out recently. This is from Pamela Wibble. And if you don't know
Okay.
Pamela Wibble, she is a lady who is kind of on a bit of a crusade against physician
Yeah.
suicide, against burnout, but tends to get maybe a little bit extreme in her wording and her hyperbole. So she just published an article this week calling basically the medical system. Let's see, what was the phrase she used it? She used it, called it human rights abuse or something like that. That's
Yeah.
what the medical system is doing to our physicians, our residents, our medical students, et cetera. That these are human rights abuses, which seems a little on the extreme side to me. I mean, without a doubt, we've got some issues in medicine, but do you think it's a human rights abuse?
Yeah, I haven't read the article itself, but I've seen several people comment on it, and it's kind of a tough thing because I think that the line that I can't put words in her mouth, but I think the line that she's trying to walk is to say that what is happening to physicians isn't completely something that we can control. It's something that is systematic and something that at times happens to us. There's certainly an individual component to it as well, but calling it a human rights abuse is a little bit strong for me, given the actual human rights abuses that happen internationally and that we read about in the news. And I haven't ever personally experienced that or dealt with refugees or people that have had what we classically call a human rights issue. But yeah, it's pretty strong wording for something, and I don't know if it is hyperbole, if she's trying to really just draw some emotion to something that's a really important topic. But there's lots of words for this nowadays. We call it burnout or moral injury or compassion fatigue or secondary PTSD. I mean, we have so many words to describe the phenomenon that is, burnout or physician problems in medicine. So I don't know. Lots of people use lots of different words to describe what's going on.
So, I mean, clearly we have a problem in medicine. I think our suicide rate is 2x what the general population is. And I'm not sure how much that is the fact that we actually know how to kill ourselves. Whereas based on my
Yeah.
experience in the emergency department, there are a lot of people that feel suicidal that just don't have a basic understanding of physiology and pharmacology, or they'd be dead. So maybe we're just more effective at it. That's kind of one of the things they say about elderly men, that they're just way better at committing suicide. When they try it, they're more likely to be successful. How much of it do you think is that fact versus the fact that, we're more likely to be suicidal?
Yeah, it's tough to say because getting numbers on attempts versus completed acts are obviously two different metrics. So it's challenging to say. I know that literature supports that in men it's about 1.5 times greater, and in women physicians it's more than 2. And so the numbers certainly seem to be higher. And I don't know. I don't know how many people, no matter what their level of training or education experience is, couldn't come up with a way to complete the act if that's really what was on their mind. And having had a family member that, died by suicide, people find a way if that's really what's going on. So, I certainly think that we probably have a higher completion rate, but I think that there is something to the numbers, that we have higher rates of mental illness and depression and ultimately suicide in the medical profession. So I can't really parse out the numbers there for you, but I do think it's not just fabricated by the fact that we know how to do it better.
So what do you think is the solution? I mean, she mentions quite a few options in her article, but this is a complex problem. I don't think it's a problem with an easy solution. What are some of the things that you think would reduce burnout, that would reduce mental illness among physicians, that would reduce some of these issues we're seeing with our colleagues?
Yeah, unfortunately, I always break this up into two different things. So there's systematic causes and systematic solutions. And unfortunately, as physicians, we often don't have much control over that. So, we are in situations where we're forced to see patients faster than we want with an electronic medical record that often doesn't work how it should. We have limited patient interactions and lots of challenging, traumatic things that we see. And we're, led by administrators who can't do our job, don't know what our job is, and ultimately, make decisions about how we're supposed to act while they chase metrics for hospitals. And so it's challenging because, ultimately, a lot of it's going to come from eventually, I hope, from administrators who actually take ownership of, the what is being a medical professional nowadays, and helping foster an environment that improves our situations. But I also don't think that that's going to happen tomorrow. And so, I break up other things into individualistic, causes. Certainly, there are the things that are often touted as, being helpful, whether it's from meditation or, taking breaks, or, speaking to counselors or therapists. And I think that those things are helpful. But the problem is that many people, and this is, kind of the point of my website, many people feel trapped in a job that they would otherwise love to go part-time for, or step away from, and they can't do it because of the financial decisions that they've made. And so I do think that financial independence is a helpful solution to stepping back from medicine. And I know many people who have taken part-time leave, or, just stepped back from a full-time gig and gotten substantially better and fallen back in love with a job that they used to really care about. And so I think there are systematic solutions that are further down the horizon, it seems, and then individual stuff that we can do to try to help. But ultimately, we just want to make it worse. We don't want to trap ourselves in a job that we can't stand, and that's burning us out.
Now we have a question here from Ramesh, who's asking, is this doctor suicide a U.S. only phenomenon? I've never heard of this outside of the USA. Is this an international problem? Is it a U.S. problem? What do you think?
Yeah, I actually don't know the answers to that, because most of the statistics that I've seen are from ACGME, which is an American council, or from Medscape, which I think there's over 15,000 physicians in that one, but I don't know if I'd have to go back and look and see if they break it up into American versus international physicians. But the numbers that I'm familiar with are predominantly in the States.
It would certainly be an interesting thing to look at, wouldn't it? Because
yeah,
I mean, the professional stresses of being a doc, seeing people that are sick and injured day in and day out, are the same from one country to another, but the systems are very different. I don't get
right.
the impression that people are dealing with terrible EMRs in every country in this world. They're
Probably not.
certainly not dealing with all the metrics that we're having to deal with,
Yeah.
But I wonder how much of this, and this comes from a comment a little higher in the string, somebody asked, Brendan asked, human rights abuse or first world problem? How much of this is just doctors whining? Because we're good at whining. We've been whining since we were pre-meds. And
Yeah.
how often do we just take something we don't like about our job or something we don't like about our lives and say that's contributing to burnout? EMRs contribute to burnout. Administrators contribute to burnout. I mean, lots of jobs have lousy bosses.
Up a little bit there.
I mean, lots of people have these bad jobs, essentially.
Yeah.
How much of this is just doctors whining about their jobs? It's just a first world problem, and how much is something unique?
Well, so that's where I think that Pamela, Dr. Wible, gets her human rights speech from. It's hyperbole, because the one thing that people that are passionate about the subject care about is that there's not a lot of victim shaming. When you have a highly intelligent, highly educated person who is resilient enough to get through medical school, residency, training, and then they decide to end their life because they don't see another option, it's very, very hard for me to say, well, that person was just whining too much. I can't relate to that rhetoric, honestly. And I think that it would be interesting to compare the United States numbers to international numbers with different systems. But at the end of the day, people went into a job expecting one thing. Reality was very, very different. And then they felt trapped, and they felt like the only option was to end their lives. It's very hard for me to blame that person, in a system that helped cultivate that. And I'm in my real normal job. I am an anesthesiologist, and I train people about operating room safety. And one of the big things that we teach is about culture, and about the fact that when we start blaming individuals for something that a system or a culture tends to create, we've already lost the battle. And the aviation industry is the best example of that. And they stopped killing people on planes when they decided to stop blaming captains or individuals involved in mishaps and started fixing the culture so that people could speak up and say that something was wrong. And I think that's what needs to happen in medicine.
So what would an ideal medical system look like where you could say none of the burnout we see is due to the system? How would it be different from what we have now?
I mean, I don't have all the answers, and I don't want to pretend that I do. But I think that if you clump a lot of the causes, whether it's from electronic medical records or, limited patient interactions or ordering a test that an insurance company says they're not going to pay for, really, a lot of them, in my opinion, come down to a lack of autonomy for people that spent a lot of time learning how to do their job just for someone else to tell them that they can't do it the way that they feel like they should. And when they see people get harmed by that system, it only takes so many times for a human to see someone else have real patient harm, morbidity, mortality from something before it starts to hurt badly enough that they say this just isn't right. And if you ever get to the point where that's not bothering you, then I would say that you should be greatly concerned when you see patients get harmed by a system that's not ideal, that has taken your autonomy and doesn't allow you to practice medicine in a way that would help them. So ultimately, big picture, it would be a system where physicians and other medical professionals could practice autonomously to the scope of their practice and do so in a way that would best help patients.
So more autonomy. So, I mean, how do we implement that? I mean, obviously, doctors are selling their practices to corporations, to hospitals. We're moving in the direction of less autonomy, it seems to me, as far as control of our businesses. We also seem to be, willingly giving up that autonomy in a lot of ways for the opportunity to have a little bit better lifestyle, to have less call, to do these other things that are also supposed to improve our lifestyles. It's hard for me to balance that out. We give away so much autonomy in search of this balanced life. But then in the end, I wonder how much of that is causing us to be burned out, the thing that we're trying to run away from.
Yeah, that's a complicated question because in anesthesia, at least, groups often sell out, and the people that are making money there are not the people that are coming up through medicine graduating now. It's the people that have been partners for years. And so we have a problem where people that probably don't like their job anymore have the opportunity to be given millions of dollars and potentially leave that job behind, and then they're selling, everything for the people that are coming behind them. So as a young medical graduate and, as a recent, I've been out for 3 years now, I know many people feel that way, that the people that came before us sold our profession to these big medical organizations that now run their groups. And then now we are in a situation where we don't have autonomy, and suicide and depression and mental illness rates are rising. And we're now graduating with epidemic proportions of student loan debt. So they feel trapped in a job they didn't create, and that's not what they signed up for, 10 years ago when they originally went to medical school. So I don't know. It's hard because I feel like a lot of young physicians would argue that they've been sold a bad bill of goods. That's not the same as what they expected.
Yeah, certainly we're different people 10 to 15 years later when we come out the other end of the medical training pipeline. And I don't think we should
100%.
be surprised that a lot of docs realize at that point, this isn't what I want for the rest of my life.
Right.
And so some of those docs go, well, I've got to get my loans paid off. And so they pay those off. And then they go, well, if I do this for 5 or 10 more years, as hard as I have been, I can be financially independent and do whatever I want. I mean, I just recorded
Right.
a podcast with the Physician on Fire earlier today, where we talk about how he just retired at 43. I mean, are we going to see more and more of that as we go forward because doctors feel like they got sold a bill of goods?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm not, and Leaf knows this, I'm not as big on the FIRE movement as I am on financial independence as a tool. And personally, I love my job for the most part, so I think that I'll always work 2 or 3 days a week doing anesthesia, up until probably 50, 55, somewhere around there. And even though I could probably retire when I'm 42 or 45. Now, if things change, I want the option. That said, it's challenging because part of what I do is teach medical students and residents about personal finance. And so if I talk about retiring early and they're still in training, I mean, no matter how they dice that, they're 8 or 10 or 12 or 15 years away from that happening. So early is still way down the road. And if they're already burned out or dealing with those problems, that's when you start feeling trapped. So yeah, I think that there could be a movement towards more and more physicians retiring early. If the system refuses to change. But my hope is that there will be enough financially independent physicians and other medical professionals that are willing to change the system and now have enough autonomy from their bank account that they can do so. I hope that this message gets out there and that people change it for the ones that are coming behind us and make it better instead of leaving. That said, I completely understand why people leave.
It's kind of funny. We're in the physician financial blogosphere, and you say you don't want to retire early. You're fine working to 50 or 55. Most people would look at that and
Yeah.
go, "That is early," And
Yeah.
working 2 or 3
Yeah.
days a week, that is part
Eh,
time, And you're
Yeah.
only
And
3 years out of
who
residency.
knows? Yeah, no, it's a good question. So, right now I'm working towards getting to just full time. And then after, who knows where I'll go from there. But I think ultimately I want to balance my work life and my home life. This is the new millennial way. I mean, it is what it is, but I want to be a fantastic doctor. I want to be a good dad and a good husband. And I want to be a lot of things. I don't want to have to choose between any one of those three. And at any point that I have to, like my job's going to come in third. And so, it's about finding that balance. And if that means working 3 or 4 days a week, I'm fine with that. That doesn't make me less of a doctor, and I'm certainly still accomplishing everything that academia would expect of me. It's all about balance, and it's going to look different for everybody.
Yeah. So for those who are just tuning in here, I am talking with the Physician Philosopher, a member of the WCI network. He blogs at thephysicianphilosopher.com. So check his stuff out there. We're talking about burnout. We're talking about physician suicide. And we're going to be talking some more about finances and what you can do in your financial life to help you to be in a position where if you're feeling burned out, you have options. So let's talk a little bit about that. You're 3 years out of residency. What have you done in the last 3 years to give yourself options as you move forward?
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, the biggest thing that I did was I paid off my student loan. So we paid off $200,000 in 19 months, and we improved our net worth by $250,000 in a year. And so we really started doing the smart things with our money. And now at this point, we don't have any debt outside of our mortgage. And so our lifestyle expenses are, pretty low. And since that has now happened, and we've afforded ourselves that opportunity, I've started working on defining exactly what I want to do with my life. So I have a hell yes policy where I only say yes to things that I'm really passionate about, and I say no to other things that I'm not. And that may include taking less shifts. So in my first year, I'd pick up extra shifts and kind of work towards paying off that student loan debt faster. And now I take as much time as I can get, so as long as I'm full time and meeting my obligations at work, I'm happy to work as little as possible so I can work on the other things that I'm passionate about. So I wouldn't have that opportunity if we hadn't taken care of business in the first, 2 or 3 years after finishing.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Let's talk nuts and bolts about it, right? You talked about paying off your student
Sure.
loans as fast as you can. Does that mean that you don't get a house? Does that mean that you don't upgrade your car when you leave? Does that mean you don't contribute to retirement accounts? Does that mean you put it ahead of other kinds of debt you have? I
Yeah.
mean, what does it really mean to pay off your student loans as fast as you can?
Well, so I'm all about balance. I'm about balance the entire way. And so the way that we did that was through something I call the 10% rule. So we basically took our increase in post-tax take-home pay, and we took 10% of that. That was about $10,000 after fellowship. So we took $1,000 every month, and we did whatever we wanted with it. And that included financing a car, which I know is just white coat blasphemy, but we did. And we bought a country club membership, and it has a couple golf courses, driving range, pool for the kids, and the country club that we can eat at. And I think that both those things combined was still right at or just less than $1,000. And then we took the other $9,000, the other 90%, and did exactly what we should have done with it, which was to pay down our student loans and to invest. So we put money towards our 403B, which is matched at Wake where I work. But yeah, we didn't not inflate our lifestyle. We just inflated our lifestyle with some control and some guardrails. And we were reasonable about it. And then any bonus that I got, we did the same thing. We took 10% and we enjoyed it. So we'd go on trips or go to the beach or take family, we'd go places. And then the other 90% we put towards our student loans. And so I basically used 90% of any bonus that I received in the first 20 months, plus that increase in pay, that 90% from that, and started paying it off. And so we averaged $10,000 a month, just a little more than that. But we were still maxing out our 403B. We were still maxing out my wife's governmental 457 and her 401k while we did that. And we were able to do that because we didn't buy a house and we didn't do any of the other stuff. So, if you have like the big five, as I like to call it, so childcare, your house, food, transportation, vacations, those being the big five, like we really didn't didn't have a ton of expenses in many of those things except for childcare, which is, a couple $1,000s a month when both of us work full time. Outside of that, we kept our lifestyle pretty reasonable, the same as it was. We didn't move, and we stayed in the same 1,200 square foot house, and for 2 years until we paid off the debt, and then we bought the house. So we did that. I think the last month that I paid a payment, actually, we closed on the house we were going to buy. So timed that pretty well.
So what you're saying is a lifestyle inflation is okay. You just got to avoid the lifestyle explosion.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You can enjoy a little bit of it. That's fine. I actually, what I'm big about is, look, figure out what is important to you and spend lavishly on it. Like, by all means, like, go all out. I'm perfectly fine with that. But you can't go all out on everything. So as long as you are reasonable and you don't, now, if you're all out as a $3 million house, that's obviously a problem. So we have to be reasonable about this. But, figure out what it is and take 10% or take a 50% raise. There, everyone has a different way of thinking about this, but do something reasonable and spend the money on the things that you really enjoy. But recognize that most things that we spend money on don't make us happy. So you should probably spend some time thinking about what you're going to use that for, and be okay with the fact that, there's no guilt there. It is what it is. The other 90% is going where it should.
So you mentioned your wife has a 457 and you have a 403B. How did you learn about those? How did you find out how those work and what's in them and what you're supposed to be doing with them? I mean, everybody coming out of residency has, retirement options, and most docs don't have any idea how they work or where to learn more about them or aren't interested in it. How did you get on top of all of that?
Yeah, so a lot of it was through books, like yours, or websites, and I would also, I'm an anesthesiologist, so we live by the trust but verify mantra. So I would read something at one place and then go verify it with other sources. And I would start reading through the stuff that they would send us, and I heard of a 457. I didn't really know what that entailed. And for a while, I didn't know the difference between a governmental and non-governmental, and that, a non-governmental is technically not owned by me. Whereas my wife's, is owned by the government, and if they default, we're all in trouble. But at the time, like I basically just started doing research and started figuring out that we wanted to be in a certain place by a certain time. And in order to get to that goal, it required financial decisions. And so when we put the big picture together and realized, oh, well, we'd like to not be doing this forever until we're 70. I don't want to be one of the 50% of physicians at 65 that can't retire and maintain their lifestyle. Like that I wasn't interested in that. And so, yeah, it was predominantly through blogs like the White Coat Investor, Physician on Fire, Passive Income MD, and podcasts. I started getting into those as well, and also reading. I read pretty much any book I could get my hands on at the time. So I probably read 6 or 8 or 10 books in like 6 months, because once I started, you kind of catch the bug and you keep going.
And it's so useful in the beginning too. Because you can take it right away and apply it in your life, and you can go down and make a real difference in what you're doing with your life. For those who are just tuning in, I'm talking to the Physician Philosopher. That little comment button at the bottom of your screen, you can click on it, type us a little comment, a question, we'll answer your questions. Let's talk just for a minute about your blog. At some point along the way, you decided that it wasn't just about learning this stuff for your own personal use, but you wanted to teach it.
Yeah.
What happened? What made you transition to wanting to put your thoughts on paper and document your journey and help your trainees and everybody else across the world?
Yeah, so my trainees, my residents are really where it came from. I started diving into all this stuff and started learning about it, and I'd have conversations with my residents. And one thing about me is that I just I'm an open book, and so there's nothing really taboo to talk to me about. Like everything's just kind of on the table, and my residents really like that because they can ask me questions they can't ask other people. And so I had several of them ask me about money, and I started asking them about how their life was going and what they were doing, and I started realizing that very, very, very few of them knew anything about this stuff, which was mind blowing to me because there are these incredible blogs and websites and books that are out there that exist, and despite all of that outreach, I still was surrounded by people that didn't know this stuff. It was amazing to me because the people that are, you know, within the echo chamber or in the forums or go to these websites, like it's just we hear a lot of it and we just assume that everyone knows this stuff, but that's just not true. We just finished a study at Wake looking at student loan surveys, and it was shocking how little people knew about that stuff. And so ultimately, that was part of it. And the other part of it was that I felt like there was a gap. So I felt like there was lots of talk on financial independence. There's lots of talk on just good personal finance decisions and investing, but there really wasn't anyone tying in burnout to your personal finance decisions. Because what I started realizing was I had residents finishing training who were unhappy, or they were looking for the next step up, and they were waiting for that bright light at the end of the tunnel being an attending, and they got there and then they weren't happy. And so what they did is they made a bunch of personal finance catastrophes to try to find that happiness, and they made it worse. And then they were burned out even more. And so I realized that money is a dual-edged sword where it can actually improve your situation and provide options like we talked about earlier, or it can make your situation worse and make you feel trapped in a job that you hate. And so I wanted to combine those two messages about financial independence, and using that to battle burnout.
All right, let's get into some nuts and bolts now. You are 3 years out of residency. You have your student loans paid off. What does a
Yep.
budget look like for you? I mean, how much do you spend on housing? How much do you spend on vacation? How much do you spend on food? What does
Yes.
it really look like for someone that's never lived on a budget, that has had no personal finance training? I mean, how do they model their life after yours so they can have what you have?
That's actually a really good question. So I'm making a course on this right now. So I don't budget in a traditional sense. So I don't do a $0 budget where I assign a job for every dollar. I don't use the 50-30-20 method. So basically, I'm a big believer in designing things backwards. So you can't know where get to where you're going if you don't know where that is. And so the very first thing people need to do is figure out what they actually want. Like, what do you want? Do you want to be financially independent when you're 43 and retire like Leaf? Do you want to work till you're 65? That's going to look different for everybody. And so you need to figure out what that is. And so I encourage everybody to go through the Kinder questions, is what I call it. I've got a post about that on my site. And you go through those 3 Kinder questions, and you'll be surprised that some of the things you think matter, like your house or your car, actually don't matter at all. And then once you sort all that stuff out, you start putting numbers to goals. And so my wife and I decided we wanted to, be financially independent in our early to mid 40s, and that was going to take a annual savings rate of about $115,000 to $125,000 a year. And so we automate that savings right off the top. It comes out every month, and we just meet that goal automatically by paying ourselves first. We do the same thing for our kids' college 529. We put 1250 a month in for our 3 kids. So we have an 8, about to be 6, and a 3-year-old, and they should each have about $150,000 in their 529, if not more. And then we did the same thing for our student loans when we had those. So we're like, hey, we want those to be gone. So we paid $5,500 a month, scheduled, and then we knew that we would be getting bonuses, and we put 90% of those bonuses towards that goal. And so basically what we did is we named a goal, we named a date, we made smart financial goals, and we just attacked them and made our financial goals automatic with a backwards budget, knowing where we wanted to get. And then whatever was left, we spent it however we wanted to, because that wasn't a dollar that was assigned to those things. And so I don't, to be honest with you, for the last 3 to 6 months, I haven't even tracked spending because we always live below our means. And so as long as we're attacking and reaching those financial goals, I don't care what we do with the rest of our money. We can go blow it on whatever we want to, as long as those things are being taken care of. And I should mention, we also, give money to charity. So we tied to our church, 10%. So, right now that looks like $2,500 a month scheduled, and and we just take care of the things that matter to us. So, and that's going to, again, look different for everybody.
So this is a Facebook Live. That means we get to have an interaction with you guys watching this. You can leave comments by tapping on that little comment bubble below and typing in your comments, typing in your questions, and we'll answer them right here on this Facebook Live. But if you're just tuning in, I'm talking with Jimmy. He is the physician philosopher and an academic anesthesiologist at Wake. But let's for just a second talk for a minute about what you would recommend a person who is coming in here, who wants to, become financially independent, wants to set some goals. I mean, what do your goals look like? What's your goal, for instance? What do you say when they're just starting out and they want to, come up with a goal? Do you say, I want $1 million, I want $2 million, I want an income of a certain amount? I mean, how did you set that goal?
So I think for us, it came down to, well, first of all, I'll answer the other question. So how I deal with this with my trainees and people that I interact with that are just finishing, most of them haven't heard of financial independence. So the idea when I pitch to them that I want them to practice medicine because they want to and not because they have to, and I want them to reach that goal as soon as they possibly can, like that's usually a light bulb moment for most of them. Most of them don't know that's a thing. And so, but in terms of our goal, we looked at how much we thought we could reasonably save. I mean, I think at one point putting away 40 or 50% of our income towards our financial goals. It's kind of, staved off since then a little bit more like 30 or 40% now. And at some point we realized, okay, well, the soonest that we could do it was like 42. And we basically determined that we wanted to have, maybe a little more than $100,000 a year, based on our current lifestyle and what we anticipated. Now, I can't predict the future, and so, we certainly, are going to keep saving past that, but that'll be the number where I could walk away if I wanted to. So 2.5 times that, 2.5 million. If it's, 1.2 is a little more than that. So we consider 2.5 to 3 million, somewhere in there to be the, financial independence number for us. And when we started realizing, looking at that and saying, with our age and starting out having basically no savings, because I figured this stuff out in my fellowship, if we saved $140,000 a year versus 125, it would shave like 6 months. And at some point, the amount of money that we're putting in just wasn't worth the cost right now. And so we realized that a number between 115 and 125 would get us to financial independence somewhere between 42 and 45, and that really, really going bare bones, minimalistic, more than that was not going to speed up that clock a whole lot more. And so we've found a balance with that number.
So you set your goals and then you work backward using a return of 5% or whatever to figure out how much you've got to save each year. And you look at what you're
Sure.
making and what you're spending and decide if that's realistic or not. Now, in some ways, you've got a bit of a wind at your back. I mean, you're an anesthesiologist. You live in North Carolina. You're not a occupational medicine doc living in the Bay Area. What
Correct.
advice do you have for somebody like that instead of having these tailwinds that you're enjoying with your income and your specialty and your cost of living, somebody that's maybe battling some headwinds? Maybe they're paying alimony. Maybe they are in the Bay Area or DC or some of these other areas in the Northeast that are really expensive. What do you say to them? How can they pick reasonable goals for you?
Yeah, and it's kind of like I said earlier, it's going to be different for everybody. So someone who is in a high cost of living area, may have to be, a little more reasonable about, the house that they purchase. And sometimes they may not feel like they have that choice. But at the end of the day, they may not be financially independent in their early 40s because of the area of the country they live in. They do have the choice to move, and that's tough. And I know that that's challenging for family dynamics because my wife is from South Carolina and I have like a 3-hour radius around which her parents live that I'm allowed to move to. And so I know that people are kind of locked down geographically at times. But there is the option to move somewhere else and to make some more money and to come back to where family is. But really at the end of the day, you have to look at those numbers and be okay with it. Because I mean, it depends on where you are in your career too. Like, do you love your job? Like if you love your job and you're saving 20% or 25% and you're meeting your goals and you're going to be able to retire when you're 60 or 65, like I think that's perfectly reasonable. And I think that for most physician incomes, as long as you're not living outside of your means, I mean, the median income in our country is 55 grand. And studies have shown that you're not going to be any happier above 115,000 no matter where you live in our country. And most physicians make more than that kind of money. And so I do think to some extent it's an individualistic choice. I mean, you have to choose where you live. And yeah, you might be living next door to someone that, has a different kind of job and isn't a physician. You may not be living in the physician community in the upscale place with, Ferraris and Teslas parked next door. That's fine. And I think that's actually healthy. And you're probably gonna be a better, more well-rounded person for it. But yeah, you have to make tougher choices if you live in a higher cost living city. And we are very, fortunate that we don't. I make a high income in a very low cost of living city. And so I don't take that for granted. And that's absolutely 100% part of our success.
But also deliberate. Those are choices you
Yeah,
made.
yeah. I mean, we could have moved somewhere else. I'm not from Winston, and if anybody's ever been to Winston-Salem, which we affectionately call the Dash, it's not a big happening place. I mean, it's not a big city. It doesn't have a ton of outdoorsy places. That said, it's incredibly low cost of living. It's a wonderful place to raise a family, and we're married and have 3 kids, and so it fits for us. But if you're looking for a big downtown scene, or if you want to go skiing like you guys have, out towards where you are, that's not going to happen here. Like these things are hills, so it's just not something that Winston offers. But it does offer a really low cost of living and a great place to raise a family, and you can earn a decent income.
All right, let's go to some of the questions from the viewers here. We've had a few posted. For those who are just tuning in, I'm
Okay.
talking with the Physician Philosopher. This question comes from Blake Nichols, who's asking, what's your advice for starting the conversation with trainees about personal finance? Many attendings and trainees in my program still see personal finance as a subject not to be discussed openly.
Yeah, so I think that, I mean, this is my style of leadership, but it starts with you. So if you are open and honest and willing to discuss your finances and you make that apparent to the residents that you're around, you will not, I mean, you'll be amazed at how many questions they will ask you. And so part of it is just creating an open line of dialogue where the residents feel comfortable doing that. And the other thing is as you have these conversations, really, it's going to be a whole lot less of you talking and more of you asking questions and facilitating learning. That's what good teachers do, right? So you're not the one talking so much. You're asking questions and leading them to their own conclusions. What are they doing after residency? What's their plan? Why are they doing that? What's their income going to be? And I'll ask them that. I just, you know, and everyone's personality is different, but I'm pretty blunt about it. Like what kind of deal did you get on your contract? Where are you going? What's the plan? And ultimately, that kind of opens communication, but you really need to find a way to, I think, teach this stuff in a more formal setting where people can ask questions, because what really opens this conversation is when you have a lecture and you ask questions, and in that lecture, the residents start asking questions. They start talking, and they start talking amongst themselves, and that really helps start to create that culture that you're looking for. Because if it's just a one-on-one dialogue, it's not going to change. But if you start having multiple residents and multiple attendings, and you can also, there's the other idea. I've found a few people that also are passionate about this stuff, and some of them are more into real estate than I am, and some are more into practice management, in terms of styles of businesses and anesthesia, and they can have those topics. And so for our residents, we have a six-part lecture series on practice management. For the medical students, we're doing a 10-week course. But that all started with having those conversations and finding out what the students and what the residents want to learn and what they need, and being completely willing to be transparent and open and honest about it. I don't shy away from any of their questions.
It's interesting to see that there are some that don't seem to want to learn about it or don't want to talk about it. Everybody I talk to seems very interested in it, but admittedly, that's probably a very biased sample.
No, I don't think that it is. And that's something that, so I actually had a lot of resistance teaching this subject to my residents, and initially, and after I showed them that there is a huge desire for the residents to learn this stuff, that there's someone that's willing and able to teach them this. uh, I mean, they couldn't stop them. The residents were like banging down the door, and so like that's the thing. Once you open this communication and let them realize, hey, there's someone that's willing to be honest about this stuff, and you can ask me anything that you want. Um, like you're not going to stop it. It's just going to be an open floodgate.
You know, what I've also found is doctors tend to be kind of type A, go-getters, hyper-competitive types. And you
Yeah,
basically opened up a new place for them to be a go-getter. And they go,
that's
well, why
true.
can't I be a great doctor and be financially successful? And
That's
so
true.
I think it's kind of natural for docs to go, well, my peers are doing this. I want to do it too, you know? And
Yeah,
I
I completely
agree.
agree.
Well, once the cap's off, it tends to come out pretty hard. All right, our next question comes from Ramesh, who wants to talk or wants us to talk a little bit about the concept of money dials. I don't know if you're familiar with this. I first heard about it from Ramit Sethi, who writes a blog, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. And he talks about
Yeah, I know.
money dials. I think
Okay.
basically the concept is spend your money on the things you care about the most and dial down the other things. If you dial up the traveling spending, you're dialing down the restaurant spending or the Tesla spending or whatever. But his
Yeah.
question is, do you believe in that concept where you spend or splurge on certain things which matter to you and turn down the dials on the other things?
Yeah, so actually, when I was at FinCon, I heard him speak, and I know that he is controversial in the personal finance space to some extent, but absolutely, I 100% agree with that. So I think that the problem is that you can go one direction or the other too far, right? So the traditional direction that physicians have gone is spending every dollar. They're like professional athletes; they wind up broke despite making millions of dollars, and so that's a lot of the teaching that we have right now is against that. Like, don't spend so much. Live like a resident. You need to be careful and do the smart things with your money in those first 2 to 5 years. And that's all really, really, really good talk for the vast majority of people that are physicians and just, are medical professionals, just spend too much money. That said, it goes the other direction too. Like once you start learning about this stuff, it's hard to turn it off. And I've personally experienced it where like we were too frugal. Like we were just like, cutting down to the bone and the marrow, and like we just had nothing left, and it wasn't healthy. And so my wife had to reel me back in and say like, I think it's fine to spend a little money on this, and I had to agree with her because she's an intelligent, wise woman, and I think that his idea that you spend the way you deal with that problem, right? The two directions is um, to spend lavishly on the one thing that really you want to, and then to be very reasonable or even frugal, minimalistic about the other things. Because, I financed a car, but for most people, cars aren't going to buy them happiness. They're not going to make them happy. So they probably shouldn't spend much money on those. It might be experiences for some people. My family and I don't travel that much. So like experiences and like going, hiking some great place, like that's just not our thing. And so it's going to look different for everybody, but yeah, absolutely. Spend a lot of money on the one thing that you really like and try to be really reasonable and frugal on the other things. But all of those conversations should start after you're meeting your financial goals. So I believe in money dials after you've backwards budgeted and made sure that you're meeting the goals that you've decided are prudent for you.
It's interesting. In the personal finance blogosphere, it seems like there are approved uses of money and unapproved uses, that it's okay to
Right,
spend whatever you want on travel, but not okay to
right.
spend on a car or on a fancy house or, eating out or whatever. It's kind of interesting. There's a little bit of, money shaming even among the community.
Yeah, I agree, and,
Some
and
things
that's
are
and that's
okay.
what I want to get rid of. Yeah, I want to get rid of that guilt. Take the 10% and spend it on whatever you want. There's no box, there's no limit. Like it's guilt-free spending. Do whatever you want with that money, so long as you're doing the responsible and smart thing with the rest of it. But I agree. There's a lot of guilt and kind of money shaming there, and I don't think it's healthy. I think that you can do both. You don't have to choose. Now, if you are living in the Bay Area and you are making a lower income for a physician, you might have a tougher time spending lavishly on that one thing. So I don't think that it necessarily applies for everybody, but maybe your lavish thing is living in the Bay Area.
Yep, certainly that's some people's money dial. You can travel a
Right.
ton or you can live in the Bay Area. It costs about the same. So.
Right.
All right. Well, I think we're coming up on an hour now, so we probably ought to turn this off and let you get back to your family this evening. But I sure
All
appreciate
right.
you coming into the White Coat Investor Group. For those who have been with us, you can learn more about Jimmy and his philosophy at the physicianphilosopher.com, and where you can learn more about how to manage your finances in a way to decrease your burnout, decrease your risk of suicide, and increase your happiness. Jimmy, thanks for being on this Facebook
Yeah.
Live, and we'll post this in the group for people to watch later.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Bye-bye.